And this is Cut to the Chase. My special guest today is Dr. Gerald Horne, teaches at the University of Houston. If I'm wrong, just let me know. Uh, I don't know how you're handling this whole Texas fiasco, but hopefully you won't be gerrymandered out. Uh, but, but I received something from you that was it was interesting, but at the same time troubling. You sent out some information regarding the plane crashes in Africa of many of the presidents and diplomats. Now, as you know, this is Black August, so we commemorate the brothers who have been in prisons, who've been killed in this fight. And the United States has been fighting against so many people around the world, here in the States and abroad. So maybe you could explain that. I'm going to bring it up so you could look at it and let me see, share this and talk about what was your first reaction when you saw this, or did you do the research?
No, I didn't do the research. I get so many messages, I can't even recall who sent it to me. But before I get into the meat of our discussion, or the substance, excuse me, of our discussion, let me also say that it's rather curious that the leader of Panama in the early 1980s, Omar Torrijos, also perished in a plane crash of very suspicious origin. Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, likewise. But let me focus for the time being on Samora Machel, the leader of Frelimo, the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, the African nation in the southeastern part of the continent, not far distant from South Africa, not far distant from Zimbabwe, and also the first leader of independent Mozambique coming to independence in 1975. It's approximately 1983 that he perished in a highly suspicious airplane crash. I should also mention that aboard the flight with him was one of his top aides, top comrades, Carlos Lobo. And I mention him because he attended the University of Cal State Long Beach before going back home to Southeast Africa. With regard to that plane, apparently the apartheid authorities, and recall that apartheid was not removed from the scene, at least formally, until 1994 with the election of Nelson Mandela. And so, therefore, in 1983, they were still riding high in the saddle. And apparently, what happened is that the apartheid authorities somehow were able to take over the controls remotely of the plane and direct it into a mountain, whereby all the passengers, the pilot, including Samora Machel himself, perished. Now, this takes place in the context of bitter contestation between Mozambique and apartheid South Africa. Recall that eventually Samora Machel and Frelimo were compelled to sign the so-called Nkamati Accord, which called upon them to expel militants from liberation movements of South Africa. And apparently that was not enough for the apartheid authorities. And it also takes place in the context of what can fairly be called a terror campaign, spearheaded by domestic Mozambicans known as Renamo, or the Mozambique National Resistance, who, by the way, are still in motion, although in 2025 they have refashioned and rebranded themselves as a so-called legitimate political party that contests elections. But in the 1980s, they were basically a puppet for apartheid South Africa. And I should also say, deeply influenced by the US right wing. I talk about this in my book, White Supremacy Confronted, which is a synthetic analysis of the liberation struggles culminating in South African independence under Mandela in 1994. And there's a special emphasis on the role of US actors. And in fact, given the subject for our discussion, and given the fact that a goodly number of these so-called accidents took place in the 1980s during the administration of one Ronald Wilson Reagan, and given the fact that the Reagan Presidential Library is in Simi Valley, California, not far distant from KPFK, it would be appropriate for one of our researchers to go dig into the files, as I did actually when I was writing my book. But of course, the nature of archives is that uh, inevitably more files are released or burned, for that matter. And there might be files that are now available that were not available some years ago when I was doing my research. So Samora Machel, in many ways, is the paradigmatic expression of the kind of interference that you're talking about.
I see. So your book was White Supremacy. Say the title of your book again, please.
White supremacy confronted.
White Supremacy Confronted. So you saw this list. What was your first thoughts? Obviously, we all know like this whole aspect of murder and overthrow started, I think, with maybe before that, but the Dulles brothers refined it and just killed people, overthrew people. So when you saw this list of many of these leaders, what was your first thoughts?
Well, just a footnote, just to refresh the recollection of the audience, the Dulles brothers, referring to Allen Dulles,
Thank
the
you.
early leader of the Central Intelligence Agency in the 1950s, his brother, John Foster Dulles, Secretary of State under President Eisenhower in the 1950s. Dulles Airport, the major international airport in the Washington, D.C. area, is named after John Foster Dulles. My first impression was mixed. On the one hand, incompetence is a kind of excuse for the role of the United States, at least. I mean, look at what happened with that Boeing plane in Ethiopia just some months ago, for example. Obviously, the result of incompetence on the part of Boeing executives, perhaps Boeing engineers. But at the same time, of course, there's no shock because we know, given the bloody history of the African encounter with imperialism, that these so-called accidents are simply par for the course.
Hmm. So you mentioned that Boeing crash in Ethiopia. Uh, I know here in the Black communities, they always sell or give the bad products, the bad food to the inner city where people of color are. Do you think that when they sell these planes, I think this was a new plane, they hadn't really tested it, the Max, I believe. Could this be the same type of thing? Well, let's sell it to them because Ethiopia had one, and what are your thoughts on that? Because
Well, I
could
have
you?
no evidence to substantiate that hypothesis. On a more positive note, your audience should be made aware of the point that Ethiopian Airways is probably the leading carrier on the African continent, one of the leading carriers globally. And in fact, uh, it's in the process of expanding because The Economist, the British weekly, just did a piece talking about flying, say, from one section of West Africa to another section. It's very difficult, not to mention highly expensive. Oftentimes, you have to fly to Europe. If, say, you're flying from Freetown to Lagos, Nigeria, Freetown, Sierra Leone to Lagos, you may have to fly to Europe and then fly back to Lagos. Well, with Ethiopian Airways and their attempt to knit together the continent on the basis of aviation, that will be less possible. And I should also say that, as I point out in my book, Storming the Heavens, uh, Ethiopian Airways, which came into existence during the early stages of commercial flight, was boosted into being by a number of Black American pilots, including John Robinson, uh, who opens my book because he was the pilot in the 1930s for the man then known as Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie during the time of the Italian fascist invasion, and went on to stay in Ethiopia. And when he died, perversely, in a plane crash in the 1950s, the streets were filled with mourners in Addis Ababa because of the signal contribution he had made to Ethiopian development.
Right. And Colonel John Robinson actually taught the Ethiopian uh, pilots how to fly. And I just have to say, I actually flew on the John Robinson plane from Ghana to Ethiopia, the one named after John Robinson. I was so excited about that. But here you saw all this list of people who were assassinated, or not well, it could be called assassination, died in plane crashes and helicopter crashes. Did you notice any thread as far as their political ties, or you mentioned some more Michelle? Did you notice anything about them that could lead to their assassinations? Of course, all this is speculation because we don't know. Uh, but yeah, also I think Mickey Leland, who was a congressman from Texas, died in a plane crash in Ethiopia in the 80s.
Well, it's a mixed bag. Recall what happened tragically April 6, 1994, when the president of Rwanda and the president of neighboring Burundi both died in a rather suspicious crash, which in some ways helped to trigger the genocide in Rwanda, uh, a genocide that was one of the bloodier in human history. In terms of helicopter crashes, there was just another interesting helicopter crash took place in Ghana just a few days ago that wiped out some of the top leaders. Fortunately, not the president. Now, of course, another way to look at these crashes is seeing them in a way as an emblem of underdevelopment. That is to say, that oftentimes when there are these helicopters and planes that are purchased, it is possible, per your earlier comment, that those who sell these planes do not necessarily provide understanding of the way these vehicles need to be serviced, for example. Uh, Perhaps the parts and other sophisticated machinery that is sold to them is not up to par. But then, once again, that's just in the realm of speculation. I mean, in order to come to a more definitive conclusion, we'd have to do a deeper investigation. And one of the things I found from scholarship is that it is possible that that investigation has been done, but has been buried in some obscure academic journal, for example. And it's up to us as those who seek to communicate to the public to do a deep dive to see if that proves to be the case.
Right. Let's look at this. I want to pull up. I want to pull up this here so we can look at it and go through it real quick. So, can you see that, Dr. Horne?
Is that the text that I sent you?
Yeah, that's the names, all the lists of all the people who died or all the crashes. So I'm just trying to go through it real quick and see if anything stands out. You got Bonaiva, Ati, go. There's about what? Let me see. Died in October. There's maybe 10 of them altogether, which is here's one died on April 10th. Bonaya Ati Godana, Kenya, deputy leader, former foreign minister, died on April 2006, and a Kenya Air Force plane crashed near Marsabit. So this goes on and on. There's just so many. And like you said, it could be some coincidental. I think you basically looked at some more Michelle and said, probably not that one. Uh, Let me see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. I have 10. I'm counting 10, not including the Texas congressman. These are airplane and helicopter crashes. But like you said, it'll be, we really don't know what it is, but I think it caught a lot of our attention.
Well,
I
speaking
do,
of the Texas congressman, you're referring to Congressman Mickey Leland of the
yes,
Congressional Black Caucus, who was a stalwart in the House of Representatives. And I would be remiss if I failed to note the dying in a crash of John Garang of what is now South Sudan. He was a leader of the forces in that nation that only came to independence about 10 or 15 years ago. Uh, he was academically trained, interestingly enough, in the United States of America. And certainly, it's fair to say that South Sudan, which is still racked with conflict, continues to miss his leadership.
right, right. Let me just say this. We know that the United States has attacked organizations, individuals, this being Black August. And so it's not out of the norm for maybe some of these accidents not to be accidents. So that's why it brings us, and they do work on different things. We know they outright kill people with no remorse. And, but like it's hard to sometimes tell because they try to hide it under different aspects. I know there was a movement in the United States called the Mata movement. Mata was picking up a lot of ground. It was big. Uh, the the man who headed it up was Ken Bridges. Now, at the time of Mata, all of a sudden, this sniper came on the scene and was killing people. And the last one to be shot in Maryland was Ken Bridges. And then all of a sudden, they found the sniper, and that ended Mata. So we know what COINTELPRO said. We know what all these, we know what's going on, but we don't have hardcore evidence. So some of these could have been accidents, like you said. But then again, some of them may be intentional. But with the geopolitical situation now, Dr. Horne, what really irks you? What are you really upset about right now? One of the main things, I know it's a hard question, it might not be that hard, but what are you passionate about? Are you are mad about right now? One of the main things.
Well, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, come
Well,
on.
I don't want a whole. I mean, you're brilliant, but just a couple of things. Not to go into an analytical aspect of it, but of course, people are seeing. We're all, right now on the mainstream news, most people are really upset about what's going on in Gaza with the starving of the children. Uh, I'm upset with the complicity of what I call, or many call, black faces in high places, not allowing radical and grassroots individuals to come on their platforms. And I see that as a part of the manipulation of what we're in now. So those are two of mine. Of course, the ongoing miseducation of black students in high school.
Well, I mean, first of all, there's domestic situation in the United States with the sending of National Guard into Washington, D.C., and the threat to extend that dangerous course to other cities. Coincidentally, a number of cities where Black mayors rule, including Chicago under Mayor Johnson, not only the starvation in Gaza, but I would also add the fact that the U.S. ally, the United Arab Emirates, is accused credibly of sponsoring religious zealots who are seeking to destabilize the Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger,
Oh my goodness.
doing quite significant damage. I'm thinking of the high tariffs imposed upon not only South Africa, but its neighbor Lesotho, with the recent State Department Human Rights Report arguing that there's a special alleged persecution against the European minority, particularly farmers in South Africa. Of course, at U.S. taxpayers' expense, many of them were flown across the Atlantic to a lush new life in this country, whereas the unhoused in this country continue to suffer. I mean, I could go on in this vein. So,
Okay, that's beautiful. I like that. So, last question. Do you have any strategies for us to win? When I say us, I mean those people who have morals, convictions. What strategies have you saw that might be used to change this momentum?
well, the missing link in terms of domestic struggles here in the United States is the failure to internationalize the struggle.
Oh,
I mean, it's clear that in this settler colonial regime in North America, it was based on class collaboration between and amongst those of European descent, be they the working class or the 1%. I talk about this at length in my book on the 16th century, the dawning of the apocalypse, wherein this entire system of iniquity was initiated. And yet, we have many in our community who are very good at singing the blues, but apparently they haven't learned the lesson of slavery, for example, when many of our people received assistance from north of the border in Canada, from south of the border in Mexico, etc., or even the lessons of the retreat of Jim Crow in the 1950s, which came as a direct result of the fact that many in our community, including the late great Paul Robeson, who, of course, among other things, was a Hollywood star and a concert singer and a linguist, established relations with the socialist camp and with national liberation movements in Africa and the Caribbean. And that helped to create a dynamic that led, on the one hand, to the retreat of Jim Crow, on the other hand, to an attempted marginalizing of those like Robeson. So, I mean, I've written about this at length. I speak about it whenever I'm before a microphone, but somehow the lesson has not sunk in.
hmm. Well, I think it will be. I think the times that we're in, the only good thing we could take out of it is that people are becoming aware, they're becoming more organized, and hopefully this craziness will fall soon. We've been talking to Dr. Gerald Horne. You could hear him also every Saturday at 11 a.m. on KPFK. He does interviews with different authors. And he is an author himself with many books. White Supremacy Confronted, as he just mentioned, Storming the Heavens. If I get messed up, just let me know. And one I really liked was the 16th century, the dawning of the apocalypse. That was a great book. He has many, many books, very educational. So check those out. Check Dr. Horne out on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And Dr. Horne, what can I say? You're one of my favorite intellectuals, historians, and we appreciate you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.